Hi, my name is Marissa, and I'm 35 years old. I live in Greenville, North Carolina, a quiet town that looks peaceful from the outside but feels heavy inside my heart. When people drive past our white-painted house with the trimmed lawn and bright flowers, they see what looks like a happy family. What they don't see is how hard I've had to fight to keep that picture from falling apart. 10 years ago, my son Bobby was born with hydrocephalus, a condition that caused fluid to build up inside his brain, making his head larger than normal. The doctors explained everything in terms I barely understood. All I remember was the fear in Randy's eyes when they said our baby would need surgery within weeks to survive. That tiny tube in his head, the shunt, became our symbol of hope. It saved his life, and since then, every breath Bobby takes feels like a miracle. Randy, my husband, stood by me from the first day. He works hard as a local technician and never lets me carry the burden alone. He's the kind of man who still holds my hand when the doctors talk in numbers and scans. But not everyone in our house shares his heart. His mother, Carla, believes our son's condition is a punishment for something I did wrong. She never says it directly to Randy, but I see it in the way she looks at me, like I brought shame into her family. Carla's daughter, Elena, is just as sharp-tongued. At 23, she thinks the world revolves around her and that Bobby's illness steals attention she deserves. Sometimes she laughs when Bobby trips or asks the same question twice. Those moments cut deeper than she will ever know. Still, I stay quiet for Randy's sake. He keeps saying they'll change one day. The only person who truly saw me was Raymond, Randy's father. He was gentle, wise, and always told Carla to leave me alone. Whenever I felt crushed by her words, he would say, "Kindness always outlives cruelty, Marissa." As long as he was alive, there was peace in this house. But nothing good seems to last forever. When he died, everything started to unravel. I didn't know then that his death would be the beginning of the darkest chapter of our lives, a chapter that would test my faith, my marriage, and the strength of a mother's love for her child. After Raymond's death, the house changed. It wasn't just the silence, it was the way that silence turned cold. Carla began treating every morning like a reminder of how much she resented me. She would sit at the kitchen table, coffee cup in hand, and mutter things under her breath loud enough for me to hear. If my son had married someone stronger, we wouldn't be drowning in hospital bills. Sometimes she'd say it directly, pretending it was casual conversation. "You've made Randy soft, Marissa. You've filled his life with doctors and pity." I learned to ignore her words, to focus on Bobby's breakfast and his morning medication schedule. He needed calm, not noise. Every day, I brushed his hair gently over the thin scar behind his ear, kissed his forehead, and told him how brave he was. He'd smile up at me and ask, "Mom, am I getting better?" And even when I didn't know the answer, I always said yes. Randy tried to keep the peace. After long hours at work, he would walk through the front door with a tired smile, hug Bobby, and whisper to me, "Don't let them get to you." But it wasn't easy. Carla and Elena had made it their routine to remind me that I didn't belong. Elena would scroll through her phone at the dinner table, showing her mother pictures of her friends graduating or traveling, saying, "See, Mom? That could have been me if we didn't have to spend so much money on medical stuff." Sometimes, I'd catch Randy's eyes across the table, his jaw tightening, his hand curling into a fist under the tablecloth. But he stayed silent, for peace, for family, for the hope that maybe one day they'd change. There were small moments that gave me strength, like Sunday mornings when my parents, Franklin and Janet, would visit. They never judged me, never looked at Bobby with pity. They called him our little champion. My mom would bring homemade soup, and my dad would sit with Randy, talking about football and life like everything was normal. Those visits were my lifeline. But the moment they left, Carla's bitterness returned. She'd complain about my parents interfering or call them overprotective. Once, when I was folding laundry, she came close and hissed, "You're lucky my son's too kind to see what you're doing," making him choose between his own family and you. I didn't answer her. What was there to say? I had already learned that in this house, silence was my only armor. At night, when everyone was asleep, I'd sit by Bobby's bedside and listen to the soft hum of his breathing. His little chest rose and fell like a rhythm that kept me alive. Some nights, tears would slide down my cheeks before I could stop them. But each time, I'd whisper the same promise to myself: I'll protect you, no matter what it costs me. And I meant every word. It happened on a cloudy afternoon in early spring. Raymond had been tending to the small rose garden behind the house, the one he loved more than anything. He'd always said gardening kept him young. That day, I remember hearing the rake drop, followed by a sound that made my heart freeze. When I ran outside, he was on the ground, his hand clutching his chest, his face pale. "Raymond!" I screamed, kneeling beside him. He tried to speak, but only a faint whisper came out. "Take care of them." His eyes drifted upward, and I felt the life slip from his body before the ambulance even arrived. Randy came home to flashing lights in front of the house. He sprinted through the front yard, shouting for his father. When he saw me crying beside the stretcher, something in him broke. He dropped to his knees and held his father's cold hand, whispering, "Dad, don't go yet." But it was already too late. The days that followed were heavy, like the air itself refused to move. The funeral was small, just family and a few close neighbors. Bobby stood next to me in his little black suit, holding my hand so tight it hurt. I could see confusion in his eyes. "Grandpa's sleeping, right?" he whispered. I didn't have the strength to tell him the truth, so I just nodded and squeezed his hand. Carla barely spoke at the funeral. When she did, it was to tell anyone who'd listen that stress killed him. Later, she said those words again, this time looking straight at me. "If you hadn't brought all this trouble into our lives, he'd still be here." Randy tried to stop her, his voice breaking, but she wouldn't listen. Even in her grief, she needed someone to blame, and I was the easiest target. After the burial, the house felt emptier than ever. Randy would sit alone in the living room for hours, staring at his father's chair. Bobby asked if Grandpa was in heaven, and I told him yes, that he was watching over us now. But deep down, I knew the truth. With Raymond gone, there was no one left to keep peace in this house. His death didn't just take away a father or a grandfather. It took away the last line of protection between kindness and cruelty. A few months after Raymond's passing, the atmosphere in the house shifted from mourning to forced celebration. Elena had just finished college, and Carla decided that her daughter's graduation deserved a grand party, one that would remind everyone in Greenville that the Reynolds family still had class and success, at least in her eyes. When Carla announced it at breakfast, her voice carried that tone that left no room for discussion. "We're hosting Elena's graduation party right here at the house. Everyone important will be invited. I want everything perfect." I looked at her for a second, wondering if she realized how insensitive it sounded so soon after Raymond's death. But she didn't care. To her, the party wasn't about joy, it was about image. Randy hesitated, sipping his coffee. "Mom, maybe it's too soon." She cut him off. "Your father wouldn't want this house filled with sadness. We need something good for a change." That afternoon, I found myself cleaning the patio, checking the garden lights, and measuring tables. I didn't argue. I just did what needed to be done. Bobby followed me around, asking questions about balloons and cakes, his small voice breaking the tension in my heart. "Mom, can I help?" he asked, holding a handful of plastic cups. "Of course," I said softly, smiling even though my chest felt tight. Days passed, and the house became a construction zone. Carla ordered flowers, Elena picked decorations, and I was given every hard task, polishing silverware, arranging chairs, ironing tablecloths. Whenever I tried to rest, Carla's voice followed me like a shadow. "Don't sit yet. The guests won't be impressed by laziness." Elena paraded around the house like a queen. Every few hours, she'd check the mirror or practice her thank you speech. She loved the idea of being the center of attention. Once, she looked at me and smirked. "Try not to mess anything up this time, okay?" I said nothing. I'd long ago learned that silence hurt them more than words ever could. The only comfort I had came from my parents. Franklin and Janet offered to help with the food and even volunteered to bring homemade dishes. Carla didn't like it. She never liked their involvement, but she couldn't refuse because Randy insisted. "They're family too, Mom," he said firmly, his patience thinning. The night before the party, I stood on the porch watching the lights glow softly across the backyard. Bobby stood beside me, holding my hand. "Will everyone like the cake, Mom?" he asked, excitement in his voice. I smiled, brushing his hair gently. "They'll love it, sweetheart." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe everything would go smoothly. No arguments, no cruel words, no humiliation. But deep inside, a small voice whispered that peace in this house never lasted long. And tomorrow, under those bright lights and cheerful laughter, something would break again. I just didn't know how badly. By the time the sun began to set, the backyard shimmered under soft string lights. Tables were lined with white cloths, vases filled with pink lilies stood in the center, and the big chocolate cake sat proudly on its stand, 2 tiers tall with golden icing that read, "Congratulations, Elena, class of 2025. Everything looked picture-perfect, the kind of scene that could fool anyone into thinking this was a loving family. I stood near the kitchen door, adjusting Bobby's little blue shirt while he tried to sneak a cookie from the tray. "Not yet, sweetheart," I said, smiling. "Wait until the guests arrive." He giggled and ran off toward the yard, his small steps echoing across the patio. Randy was greeting people at the gate, looking his usual calm self. My parents arrived shortly after, my mom carrying a casserole, my dad holding a bottle of sparkling juice. Seeing them felt like a breath of fresh air. "You look tired, honey," my mom whispered, touching my arm. "Just get through tonight," I murmured back. Within an hour, the backyard filled with laughter, chatter, and clinking glasses. Carla floated from table to table, her wide smile hiding the sharpness in her eyes. She made sure everyone knew she was the host. "All this is for my daughter," she told anyone who would listen. Elena basked in the attention, posing for pictures with her friends, twirling in her white dress, her curls bouncing as camera flashes went off. I stayed near the buffet, helping serve appetizers, doing what I always did, blending into the background. Bobby sat at the smaller table near the corner, coloring quietly with a couple of other kids. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe maybe, just maybe, the night would stay peaceful. But peace in this house never lasted. Carla's voice suddenly sliced through the music. "Marissa, the napkins aren't folded properly. Honestly, can't you do anything right?" A few guests turned to look. My cheeks flushed, but I bit my tongue and fixed the napkins again. Randy caught my eye from across the yard and gave me a small, apologetic look. I nodded, pretending it didn't matter. As the night went on, Elena prepared for her big moment, the photo session with the cake. She gathered everyone around, fixing her hair while Carla adjusted the candles. "Get ready," Elena said, laughing. "This is going to be all over Instagram." I helped light the candles and stood beside Bobby, who looked fascinated by the glowing flames. "Mom, it's so pretty," he whispered. I smiled and nodded. "Yes, it is. Just stay right here with me, okay?" Then, everything unraveled in a heartbeat. One of Elena's friends called her name, and she stepped forward, posing near the cake. Bobby, still holding his juice box, spotted Randy on the other side of the yard and started running toward him. Innocent, excited, just a boy looking for his dad. He didn't see the edge of the dessert table until it was too late. His small arm brushed the corner, the table wobbled, and the magnificent cake, Carla's pride, Elena's glory, slid off its base in slow motion before crashing to the ground. The sound of it hitting the patio was deafening. Frosting splattered, candles rolled, and silence swallowed the crowd. For a full 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then came Elena's scream, sharp, piercing, filled with rage. "Oh my God. You ruined my party." Her friends froze. Guests stared. Bobby stood motionless, terrified, his juice box slipping from his hand. I rushed forward. "It was an accident. He didn't mean to." But Carla's voice cut through mine, louder, crueler. "This is what happens when you bring that child here. He's nothing but trouble." "Mom, stop," Randy shouted, but she didn't hear him, or didn't want to. Carla's fury took over. She stormed toward Bobby, her face twisted with rage. Before I could reach them, she grabbed him by the shoulders. "You little brat," she yelled and shook him hard. Bobby cried out, his small hands trembling. "Please, Grandma, I'm sorry." And then it happened. Carla's hands tightened around his neck, and she shoved him back against the wall, his head hitting with a sickening thud. A scream tore through me as I lunged forward, pulling her away. "Carla, stop. You're hurting him." Randy rushed over, grabbing his mother by the arms and yanking her back. "What's wrong with you?" he shouted. Guests gasped, someone dropped a glass, and the sound of sirens in the distance began to rise. My father called 911 while my mother held me as I knelt beside Bobby. His eyes were half closed, his face pale. I could barely breathe. "Bobby, baby, open your eyes. Please." The music had stopped. The laughter was gone. In that backyard full of lights, balloons, and fake smiles, everything Carla had tried to protect, her pride, her image, her family, shattered just like that fallen cake. The moment Bobby's small head hit the wall, everything around me went silent. It was like the world had stopped spinning. The music cut off mid-beat, conversations froze, and the crowd that had been cheering seconds ago now stood paralyzed. My hands trembled as I reached for him, the sound of his body sliding down the wall burning into my memory like a scar I'd never heal from. "Bobby," I screamed, falling to my knees. He wasn't moving. Only a faint whimper escaped his lips. I could see the red mark forming near the back of his head where he'd struck the wall. My heart raced so fast that I thought I might faint, but I couldn't. Not now, not when he needed me. Randy's shout tore through the silence. "Mom, what the hell did you do?" His voice was thunder, the kind of anger I'd never heard from him before. Carla stood frozen, her chest heaving, her face pale, as if realizing what she'd just done. For the first time, she looked afraid. But that moment of hesitation wasn't enough for me. I pulled Bobby into my arms, cradling his limp body against my chest. His breathing was shallow, his little hands cold. I could smell the sugary frosting mixed with the faint metallic scent of blood from the small cut near his ear. My tears dropped onto his cheeks as I whispered, "Stay with me, baby, please stay with me." Carla took a shaky step forward, still trying to defend herself even as guests whispered in shock. He ruined everything. He pushed the table. Enough. Randy's voice was sharp, trembling with fury. "You attacked my son, Mom. My son." He turned toward Elena, who had been crying loudly, her makeup streaked down her face. "And you, standing there doing nothing." Elena screamed back. "It's not her fault. That kid has always been a problem." I looked up at her, disbelief washing over me. "He's 10 years old. You're blaming a child for your mother's violence." Carla snapped again, her fear turning back into venom. "You've poisoned my son against his family. This is all you're doing, Marissa? Ever since you came here?" "Don't you dare," Randy interrupted, stepping between us. His voice cracked, pain and anger twisting together. "You hurt my child. You don't get to talk about family anymore." My father, Franklin, pushed through the crowd, his face pale but determined. "The ambulance is on the way," he said, his voice steady even though his hands shook. My mother, Janet, knelt beside me, gently touching Bobby's forehead. "He's breathing, sweetheart. He's going to be okay," she whispered, though I could see the terror in her eyes. Around us, whispers spread like wildfire. Guests began pulling out their phones, some in shock, others already filming, because that's what people do now. The flashes of cameras made me sick. This wasn't a show. This was my life breaking apart in front of everyone. "Back away," Randy shouted, waving at the guests to move aside. He turned to me. "Marissa, hold him steady. The paramedics will be here any second." But before anyone could breathe, Carla tried to approach again. "I didn't mean to." Randy's head snapped toward her. "Don't touch him. Don't even come near my family again." The wail of sirens grew louder until red and blue lights flooded the yard. 2 police officers and EMTs ran in, their calm professionalism slicing through the chaos. One of them gently touched my shoulder. "Ma'am, we'll take it from here." I hesitated before letting go of Bobby. "Please, please be careful. He has a medical condition. He's had surgery before," I said, my words tumbling over each other. The EMT nodded. "We'll handle him gently, I promise." They placed him on a stretcher, fitting an oxygen mask over his face. He let out a weak cry, and I felt my knees give out. Randy caught me before I fell, holding me upright as the stretcher rolled past us. Then came the moment I'll never forget, the officer turning toward Carla. "Ma'am, we need you to step aside." Carla blinked, her mouth opening in confusion. I was just... "Ma'am, you're under arrest for assaulting a minor," the officer said firmly. He took her wrists and clicked the handcuffs into place. The sound echoed through the stunned crowd. Elena screamed, "You can't do this." "That's my mother," and tried to push the officer. He stepped back and signaled his partner. "You're interfering with an arrest, ma'am. Please step away." When she refused, shouting and flailing, they restrained her too. Carla cried out as they led her toward the patrol car, her voice shaking between rage and desperation. "Randy, stop them. I'm your mother." But Randy didn't move. He stood there, staring at her with hollow eyes. "Not anymore," he said quietly. The guests began to leave one by one, murmuring condolences, some too afraid to meet our eyes. My father followed the ambulance in his car, while my mother stayed with me and Randy. As the flashing lights disappeared down the street, I realized something had changed forever. The home that had once been a fragile balance of love and endurance was now a battlefield. Randy wrapped his arm around me as I trembled. "We're going with him," he said. I nodded, my eyes locked on the empty spot where the cake once stood, its frosting still smeared across the floor like the last trace of false happiness. That night, Greenville's soft evening air felt heavier than ever. The party that was supposed to celebrate a new beginning had instead destroyed what little family we had left. The ambulance ride felt endless. The sirens wailed, bouncing off the quiet streets of Greenville, and I sat beside Bobby, gripping his hand so tightly that my knuckles turned white. His tiny fingers twitched now and then, and each movement gave me a fragile thread of hope. The paramedic kept checking his pulse, speaking in a calm, steady tone that I couldn't quite hear through the panic in my head. Randy sat across from us, his face pale and still. I'd never seen him so quiet, so completely shattered. He looked like a man who had lost something sacred, and maybe he had. Behind the ambulance, through the back window, I could see the faint glow of police lights following us, escorting Carla and Elena to the station. When we arrived at Greenville Memorial Hospital, everything blurred together. Nurses rushed Bobby inside while a doctor met us at the entrance. "Head trauma?" he asked, walking fast. The paramedic nodded. "He hit the wall after being shaken. History of hydrocephalus." The doctor's expression shifted to concern, and he gestured to a nurse. "CT scanned immediately. Let's check for any shunt displacement." The words hit me like a wave, shunt displacement.
I knew what that meant.
If the pressure in Bobby's brain had shifted, if the tube had moved, it could be dangerous. My body went cold. We were asked to wait outside the imaging room. I sat down, staring at my hands covered in faint streaks of frosting and tears. Randy knelt in front of me, his voice trembling. "He's strong, Marissa. You know he is." I nodded, but the lump in my throat made it impossible to speak. After what felt like forever, the doctor came out. His expression was serious, but gentle. "He's stable," he said, and I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. "There's a mild bruise and some swelling, but no internal damage. The shunt's intact. He'll need rest, but there's no sign of long-term harm." I pressed my hand to my mouth, sobbing in relief. Randy closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, God." The nurse allowed me into the room a few minutes later. Bobby lay there, small and fragile, and four in his arm, his chest rising steadily. I brushed his hair back and kissed his forehead. "Mommy's here," I whispered. "You're safe now." Outside, the police officer who had followed the ambulance waited for Randy. His tone was calm but firm. Sir, your mother and sister have both been taken into custody. We'll need statements from you and your wife once your son is settled. Randy nodded without hesitation. You'll have them. I'll testify myself if I have to. As the officer left, Randy walked back into the room and stood beside me. He reached out, took my hand, and said softly, "This ends now, Marissa. No more chances. No more forgiveness." And for the first time in years, I saw in his eyes what I had been waiting for, conviction. He wasn't just a husband or a father anymore. He was finally ready to fight for us. 3 weeks later, Greenville County Courthouse stood tall under a pale morning sky. The air outside carried a strange stillness, the kind that comes before something final. I held Bobby's hand as we climbed the steps, his fingers small but strong inside mine. He was recovering well, his bruise had faded, his smile was returning, but the memory of that night still flickered behind his eyes. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Reporters sat in the back rows. Word of the graduation party assault had spread fast through town. Some people came out of sympathy, others out of curiosity.
But I didn't care who was watching.
All I wanted was justice, not revenge, not drama, just the truth to finally matter. Carla sat at the defendant's table, dressed neatly in gray, her hands folded tightly in front of her. Elena sat beside her, her face pale and tear-streaked. Neither of them looked at me. Carla's lawyer whispered something in her ear, but she stared ahead like stone. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The sound of his gavel hitting would echoed sharply through the room. Court is now in session. The state of North Carolina versus Carla and Elena Reynolds. The prosecutor, a calm woman named Amanda Hayes, began by outlining the case. Her words were sharp, professional, and deeply human all at once. On the night of June 8th, during a family gathering, the defendant, Carla Reynolds, physically assaulted her 10-year-old grandson, a child with a known medical condition, causing head trauma and emotional distress. Her daughter, Elena Reynolds, interfered with law enforcement and verbally assaulted responding officers. As she spoke, I looked at Carla. She didn't flinch. Not once. When it was my turn to testify, my knees almost gave out. Randy squeezed my hand before I took the stand. My voice shook as I began. It was supposed to be a celebration. Elena's graduation. My son didn't mean to do anything wrong, he just ran toward his dad. He hit the table by accident and the cake fell. Carla. She grabbed him before I could stop her. She strangled him and slammed his head against the wall. I paused, the memory choking me all over again. He's only 10, I whispered. He was apologizing when she hurt him. Randy's testimony came next. His voice carried the pain of a son and the strength of a father. My mother crossed a line that night. She said cruel things before, but this was violence. I saw her with my own eyes, and I will never forget the sound of my son's head hitting that wall. The prosecutor then presented CCTV footage from one of the guests' phones, the moment after the cake fell, the chaos, the screams. Carla's hand on Bobby's shoulder, the gasp from the crowd. The footage silenced the courtroom. When the defense tried to argue temporary loss of control and emotional stress, the judge's expression hardened. He leaned forward and said, "There is a difference between losing control and losing humanity." After closing arguments, the courtroom waited. My heart pounded in my chest as the judge began reading the verdict. For the charges of child assault, attempted strangulation, and child endangerment, Carla Reynolds is hereby sentenced to 8 years in state prison, with no parole for the first 5 years. For obstruction of justice and verbal assault on law enforcement, Elena Reynolds is sentenced to 1 year in county jail, followed by 2 years of probation and mandatory anger management counseling. Carla gasped. Elena started crying, whispering, "Mom, do something." But Carla just stared forward, her face empty, her pride finally stripped away. As the officers led them out, Carla turned her head once toward us. I thought she might say something, an apology, a plea, but she didn't. The door shut behind her, and the echo of those heavy steps felt like the end of a lifetime. Randy exhaled, his shoulders trembling as he turned to me. "It's over," he whispered. I nodded, tears blurring my vision. Yes, I said softly, it's finally over. For the first time in years, the air around us didn't feel heavy. Justice, quiet and complete, had finally found its way through the cracks of our pain. The weeks after the trial passed in quiet recovery. For the first time in years, our house in Greenville didn't echo with tension or whispered insults. It was calm, almost too calm. The walls, once filled with shouting, now carried the gentle sound of wind through the open windows and Bobby's laughter echoing from the backyard. I woke up one morning to the scent of pancakes and coffee. Randy was in the kitchen, wearing his old gray t-shirt, flipping pancakes while humming softly. "You're cooking?" I teased, leaning against the doorway. He grinned. Figured I'd give my wife a morning off. It was a small thing, but after everything we'd been through, it felt enormous. I walked over and wrapped my arms around him, resting my head on his chest. "Thank you," I whispered, "for not giving up." He kissed the top of my head. "You never let me," he said with a smile. Bobby came running in, his hair messy, his face bright.
Mom, Dad.
"Can we have a party today? Like a fun one, just us?" Randy looked at me, and I could see the same thought in his eyes. A celebration, not of survival or justice, but of life. "I think that's a great idea," I said. By noon, our small backyard was transformed again, not with fancy decorations or guests, but with laughter and color. My parents, Franklin and Janet, arrived carrying food and balloons. Bobby helped his grandfather tie streamers around the fence, while my mom set the table with her homemade dishes. There was a new cake too, smaller, simple, with white frosting and bright blue lettering that read, "Our hero Bobby." When the bakery owner heard what had happened, she made it free of charge. "Every hero deserves cake," she'd said kindly. As we gathered around the table, Bobby's eyes sparkled. He looked stronger, more confident, not the frightened boy from that terrible night, but a child who'd survived something dark and come out shining. I placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Go ahead, sweetheart. You can cut it." He took the knife carefully, his tongue poking out in concentration, and with one big slice, the cake divided cleanly. Everyone clapped and cheered. His laughter, pure and free, filled the air like sunlight breaking through a storm. When we sat down to eat, Randy raised his glass of juice and said, "To family, the kind that stands together, no matter what." My father nodded. "And to second chances," he added softly. As I looked around the table, my heart swelled. For so long, I had lived surrounded by cruelty disguised as family. Now, sitting there with the people who truly loved us, I finally understood what real family meant. It wasn't blood. It was loyalty, kindness, and the will to protect one another even when life turns cruel. Later that evening, after everyone left and Bobby fell asleep, I sat on the porch watching the last bit of daylight fade behind the trees. Fireflies flickered in the yard, their glow soft and peaceful. Randy came out, 2 mugs of tea in hand. "You okay?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "More than okay." He sat beside me, and we watched the stars appear one by one. For the first time in years, the future didn't scare me. It felt open, full of possibility. We'd been through hell, and somehow found our way back. The scars were still there, emotional ones never fade completely, but they no longer defined us. As the night grew still, I whispered to myself, "This time, no one can ruin our happiness." Randy looked over and said softly, "That's because we finally learned who our real family is." And for the first time in a long, long time, I truly believed him. When I look back now, it feels like I've lived a lifetime between those moments, from the night of the party to the quiet peace of today. There were days when I thought our family would never heal, when fear lived in every heartbeat. But I was wrong. Healing doesn't come all at once. It arrives slowly, in pieces, in every smile from Bobby, in every sunrise Randy and I face together, and in every breath that feels free again. I've learned that sometimes the people who share your blood can wound you the deepest, but real family isn't built from DNA. It's built from love, sacrifice, and the courage to protect what's good. Justice may come late, but it comes. And when it does, It doesn't erase the pain. It simply proves that truth still matters. I don't hate Carla or Elena anymore. Hate is too heavy to carry. I've set it down and chosen peace instead. Now, when I tuck Bobby into bed and hear him whisper, "Good night, Mom," I know we survived something that could have broken us completely. We didn't just survive. We became stronger. And that, I've realized, is the truest kind of victory. If there's one thing life has taught me, it's that silence in the face of cruelty is its own kind of prison. For years, I stayed quiet, believing that patience would change people who never wanted to change. But the truth is, strength doesn't always mean staying silent. Sometimes it means standing up, even when your voice shakes, even when it costs you everything. I spent so long trying to please those who only saw my son's illness as a burden. Yet the moment I chose to protect him, to fight for him, I realized that love backed by courage is unstoppable.
My son taught me that.
Despite his pain, his laughter never faded. He showed me what resilience truly means. To anyone listening who's trapped in fear or guilt, you don't owe loyalty to people who break you. You owe it to yourself to rise, to protect what's innocent, and to demand the respect you deserve. Justice may come slowly, but it always finds its way to those who stand for truth. And when it does, you'll look back, not with bitterness, but with pride, knowing you survived and turned your wounds into strength. Thank you for watching this story until the end. If this story touched your heart or made you feel something real, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Your support helps us bring more emotional, true-to-life stories that inspire, heal, and remind us of the strength within every family. Stay tuned, a new story is coming soon.